And welcome into the locker room this week with Gerhard. I'm Chase. Got a great show lined up for you, and let's start like we have been the past few weeks with college basketball. We're nearing the end, but the number one seeds went down this week, Gerhard.
Yeah, it was interesting because this tournament was based on, and really all the intrigue came from the upsets. It came from the Michigan State upset. It came from upsets from the 3 seeds and the 4 seeds and the 5 seeds. But the thing was that the 1 seeds all still stayed intact, and that was kind of the storyline going into that second weekend. And then you had the 1 seeds go down the way they did. You have Virginia lose in the fashion that they did, and then as well as Oregon. I think that we've gotten to a point where being the 1 seed, I don't think has that same gravitas as it used to have for a very long time. And especially when you match up these 1 seeds against the 4 seeds and the 5 seeds. And then, you had a lot of these great matchups with Kansas and Villanova, as well as the top seed and the 2 seed in the bottom part of that bracket with Kansas or with North Carolina, and as well as Villanova and some of the other teams that were in that region that you saw so many upsets, and then at the end it really became chalk. It's just interesting to see these 2 seeds make it to the Final Four.
There was a lot of talk at the beginning when the bracket came out about how Syracuse may or may not should be in the bracket.
Right.
What does that say about them that they've made this run?
It's so funny because every year seemingly we have one of these stories where it's a lot of guys that are in the national media, they puff their chest and they get angry and they have all this vitriol about this team should be in, this team got snubbed, this team was not good, this team was. But it just goes back to the beauty of this tournament, and it goes back to how much just playing well down the stretch really matters. We've talked about Syracuse before on this show and the way that their zone just makes it so hard for teams to score against them, and that zone's really kept them in games. But let's not lose sight of the fact that so many teams have missed easy shots against Syracuse, and Syracuse has given up a lot of easy baskets that teams just haven't finished, haven't capitalized. So it's not like Syracuse is all here all by themselves. I think a lot of teams did a lot to beat themselves, but give credit to Jim Boeheim and his guys. Boeheim's one of the guys that is one of the best at each game to game, prepping his team for that game, and has got them to the Final Four.
Well, let's move from the basketball court to the baseball field. Jacksonville State baseball, they're 9-0 in conference play. They're 16-7 overall. Gerhard, I know you spent a little time with them this week. What are you seeing from the Jacksonville State baseball team?
Really a lot of everything. And this team, and I hate to say teams have no weaknesses because I think teams do have weak points, but this team is about as solid as you can get across the board. From starting pitching to relieving, and then batters 1 through 9 are about as good as it gets. And I think that what we're seeing right now with the OVC start that they've had, we're seeing a team that is really starting to gel around some of their key players. They have a senior, Daniel Hoyt, also has Daniel Clayton, and I think that we've gotten to a point with JSU baseball that they no longer rely on just one side of the ball being dominant. They have different ways to score, and we're seeing that now. And I think that all this 9-0 start does in conference play does a lot for this team moving forward, because if they want to win a championship, an OVC championship, OVC tournament championship, and start making it to the NCAA regionals, they're going to start playing this kind of ball. And to see them doing it at this point of the season, one of the things that Coach K said in a recent interview to me was, this team, as well as we're playing, we haven't played as good as we could play. And that's the thing for this team, is they can get better, and that's what's good for them moving forward.
All right, well, let's take a look at some high school spring sports. And the spring sports season is in full swing now, and the Alabama Sports Writers Association have released their polls for this season. So let's take a look first at the baseball top 10, and we'll start with Class 6A. And there you see at number 10, the Oxford Yellow Jackets, and then followed by Northview, Hillcrest, Tuscaloosa, Decatur, Opelika, Spanish Fort, Muscle Shoals. They're doing great this season. Coleman, Hartselle, and Florence. But I want to say something about the Oxford Yellow Jackets, Gerhard. Until this week, they were on a 20-game win streak.
Wow.
Which you don't see a lot, especially in 6A baseball.
Right.
They lost to Hoover to end that streak. They lost to them 4-3, but they've won 3 straight games since then. So the vibe at Oxford is pretty hot right now. Moving on to Class 4A, Holtville comes in at number 10, Haleyville number 9, and there you see the Hoax Bluff. They're at number 8, Cherokee County at number 7, Jacksonville at number 6, 3 of our local teams there. Aniana at number 5, Trinity at 4, Deschler 3, St. James at 2, and UMS Wright at number 1. Next up is Class 3A, and there you see the Ohatchee Indians come in at number 6, and some familiar teams, Madison Academy, Bayside Academy there, and American Christian at number 1. Next up, we'll move to softball, Class 6A, and there you see the Oxford Yellow Jackets ranked in softball as well. They sit at number 3, and then the Southside Panthers come in at number 1 in Class 6A in high school softball. Next up is Class 5A, and there you see the Moody Blue Devils at 10, and Alexandria is number 5. And then Rehoboth comes in at the top seed in, or the top in Class 5A. Next up is Class 4A with Cleburne County Tigers coming in at number 5. And Gerhard, you see Curry High School, number 1 team. They are the number 1 team in America in high school softball.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. In order for Cleveland County to win a state championship, they're going to have to beat the best team in the country. And it really goes for all teams in Class 4A. But every now and again, we'll see this in baseball and in softball. We've seen it with Vestavia a while back, a national championship baseball team. There's a lot of good baseball and softball in this area. But, I mean, you can't understate how good it is to be a Class 4A team. This is not 7A. This is a 4A team, the number 1 team in the country according to USA Today.
Next up, we have Class 3A, and there you see the Pleasant Valley Lady Raiders ranked number 7. Hale County comes in at number 1 there in Class 3A. And in 1A, we see Appalachian at number 10, Coosa Christian, the Conquerors, at number 5, and Raglan at number 4. You know, Raglan's one of those teams you see in this Class 1A poll every year.
Yeah, and they're always a threat to win a state championship in Class 1A, and we will see how they do post Jonathan Nix. He was their coach there for a very long time, and it looks like so far so good with this team. It's also good to see Coosa Christian in there as well as Spring Garden, a team that we know so well from their basketball success.
Right.
And now they're doing it in softball, and as of right now, sitting as a team that is a contention for winning a state championship.
And that's it for softball there, but we'll take a look at some girls soccer. There you see in Class 6A, Southside comes in at number 8. And good soccer there happening in Gadsden. And then in the Class 4A to 5A, we have the Jacksonville Golden Eagles at number 8. And some good soccer there. Westminster Christian, St. Paul's, of course, comes in at number 1. And, you know, spring sports, like I said, they're getting in full swing. And by the looks of that, we got some great programs here in East Alabama.
Yeah, it should get really interesting as we move forward into the season. We're about halfway through the regular season, if you want to diagram it that way, and we're about week 6, week 7 into the baseball season and the softball season. Those usually go about 10, 11 weeks before the playoffs, and soccer's about midway through as well. So it'd be really interesting to see the way all these teams succeed and move forward. A lot of these polls are really early. A lot of these writers that haven't seen a lot of teams from down south. So as they start getting intermingling inside of region play, it'll get really, really, really interesting.
We'll keep you updated with all of that, but right now we're going to grab a timeout. When we come back, we will talk some March Madness, so stay with us. Back here in the locker room, and a topic that we've been discussing a lot the past few weeks, March Madness is coming to an end. Final Four this weekend, Championship Monday. Before we get into picking some of the games, what's y'all's thoughts on the tournament overall, Mickey?
Well, I just hate to see it come to an end. As I mentioned, I think on a previous show, this has been one of the most fun tournaments to watch that I have in recent memory, and was very impressed in that the teams that pulled the, quote, upsets, as you followed them on into the preceding rounds, they were very, very competitive. So I don't think there was any flukes in this tournament. I think it was a lot of parity in this tournament. Some of the, and seeing Kansas, get knocked out, who I think all of us thought might have been the best overall team in it. It's just been a fun tournament to watch.
Absolutely, and the scoring has gone up, and I really like that. And you're getting situations and stories like Syracuse, a team that people riled against even being in the field of 68, and now they're in the Final Four. And a team like Wichita State, the run that they had from the first four to the Sweet 16. I just think that there's a lot of great storylines, great angles. But I will say, as we sit here right now, I'm talking to this camera. we have a TV24 bracket challenge, and I grade this thing. These two are the last people left to have a chance to win it. So I know we'll pick games here, but I want to go ahead and give you the synopsis, the way it kind of lays out, the points available. It looks like you two are down to the final two that will win this thing. So I will be cheating off your brackets as we talk about it next year, but hopefully right here in the locker room I can pick them right.
I'm shocked at that. I can promise you that.
Well, let's take a look at our final 4 picks, and Mickey, we'll start with you. Your final 4 and your champion, and why?
Well, I'm picking North Carolina to beat Syracuse. I think they're probably, even though Oklahoma was my bracket champion, I picked them to win it all, and I'm going to stick with that. But kind of thought Kansas and North Carolina were 1 and 1A. And then even though I wouldn't be surprised to see Villanova beat Oklahoma, 2 really good 2 seeds who could proven that they probably should have been 1 seeds. I'm going to say Oklahoma, and then I'm going to say Oklahoma over North Carolina in the championship game. I'm going to stick with my bracket.
Yeah, and that's a good place to go, and I'm really kind of following suit with the Oklahoma thing. You've been talking about Buddy Hield, really, it seems, for like the last month. And what I like about Buddy Hield, I think he's the best player in this tournament right now, bar none. Bryce Johnson from North Carolina, a close second. But as we move into the championship game, I think North Carolina beats Syracuse, and I think Syracuse wants to keep it low scoring. But the good thing about North Carolina is they don't shoot a lot of three-pointers. So when they move a basketball game to that football stadium, which is a conversation that needs its own platform, but when they move it there, it really hurts three-point shooting teams. And I think North Carolina does enough down low. They'll do enough down low to beat Syracuse. But a team like Villanova, I think, will really struggle against Oklahoma only because of the way they put that game in a football stadium. It's just harder for the depth perception. And we see this in high school basketball, too, whenever they move games to the BJCC. I think Villanova will struggle to hit the three-pointer. That's what's really kept them in this tournament. I think Buddy Hield and the guys will get to the championship game. But I like North Carolina because of both Bryce Johnson and Marcus Page. I do think Buddy Hield is the best player in this tournament. I don't think it'll be enough, though. I like the Tar Heels to win it.
And we'll look at mine now. It's the exact same as Gerhard's. I've been a fan of North Carolina for a long time. I was glad to see them seeded number 1. I thought since day one they could do it. So I've got them winning the national championship, playing Oklahoma. But I think this Villanova-Oklahoma game is going to be a great game. Villanova has, we've watched them do great things this season and even in this tournament. But I'm sticking with the North Carolina Tar Heels in this one. Let's talk about these games individually a little bit. The Villanova-Oklahoma game. Kind of what are some keys for the both teams, Mickey?
Well, to me, I think what makes Oklahoma special is Buddy Hield. The chemistry that he brings to the table with you just don't see a lot of that in some of the past national champions in college basketball, especially Kentucky with the one and dones. And yeah, I equate it to almost like a travel team, an AAU team. They get together for a year, they win a trophy, then they move on.
Right.
But Oklahoma's kind of an old school the way they've done it, and so I know much more about them than I do Villanova. I saw Villanova obviously in the upset over Kansas. They're capable of beating anybody, but I just think Oklahoma has the one thing they've got going for them, I think, as much as anybody, and North Carolina a lot as well, and that's the team chemistry.
Absolutely, and that's part of the reason why I really like Oklahoma too. I like Villanova because they can shoot. They're probably the best shooting team left in the field. But what always has bothered me about teams that rely on the three-pointer, and I say rely, quote unquote, they're not the Golden State Warriors, but they need that shot to fall really from the beginning of the game and through the mid part of the game. Because if you're trying to shoot late against a team like Oklahoma, I just don't think you have much of a chance. And depending on the way those first few fall, and I just have a feeling that when you move that game into that arena, it really affects three-point shooting teams. And the thing that Villanova has ridden to this point, and you mix that with the fact that Oklahoma comes in with the best player, and Buddy Hield shooting like 46% or something like that from downtown. I mean, he's absolutely phenomenal. I just think that they'll have enough, and Lon Kruger and his guys will move on.
Well, it'll be fun to watch the Final Four this weekend, and then the national championship on Monday. We're going to grab another timeout. When we come back, it's the Locker Room Roundtable. Stay with us. Back here in the locker room, and it's time for the Locker Room roundtable, and we'll start with some Major League Baseball opening day this weekend. What are some teams y'all are looking for this season?
Well, I'm a lifelong Braves fan, and I'm very excited about not only what the Braves are doing for the long term, and I'm excited about. I think they could be better this year than a lot of people are giving them credit for. Obviously, the pitching will be a key, how that pans out. They're going to need some of these young guns that they've traded for that they would prefer to not have to rush, that are going to start in the minor league system. They're going to need one of those two guys to blossom and get to the big leagues if they're going to have a successful season, because they're really only, you got Tehran at the top, Bud Norris, a question mark, and then you got Matt Whistler, who had a great rookie year. Past that, that's where they're going to need some of these young guns to step up. But I think Hector Oliveira had a great spring. I think he's going to emerge. I think the top of their batting order is as good as it's been in a long time. Then you got Freddie Freeman and all those. I just think that they're going to be a fun team to watch if they can shore up that starting pitching, and some of these young guns that they've got in the minors can step up before the season's over.
And really, history kind of proves that should happen with Braves. I mean, they've done a great job scouting, and their farm league is one of the best in all of baseball. And I think another good thing about the Braves, another key thing, is they need to stay healthy, and Freddie Freeman needs to stay healthy, especially with that wrist. Another thing I'm looking out for is the way teams have built is so much differently now than it used to be. I mean, last year, the Kansas City Royals were the best team in baseball, won the baseball championship. Name 5 players that play for the Royals. Baseball fans can't do that. And they're doing it because they don't have a one ace dominating Matt Harvey, John Smoltz kind of guy. I mean, baseball is not built like that anymore. It's built on solid starting pitching, but a really, really great bullpen, really great closers, and then good 1 through 8, 1 through 9 batting. I like to see what teams do that. And a team like the team that I'm rooting for, so talk about the fanship angle of it. I'm a Chicago Cubs fan. I know you think you hear this every year from the Cubs, but I think this is our year. I think this is a year that we can win 100 games, and I think that everything's come together, especially with Jake Arrieta, the pitcher, and then they shored up Chris Bryant. They got a former Brave and Jason Hayward now playing in the outfield, dominating outfield as far as hitting goes and what they can do as far as power goes and home run goes. I mean, I honestly think that they can get maybe 80 to 90 home runs out of their outfield alone. So I'll be interested to see the way the Cubs go. But then, of course, another team like the New York Mets, who made it to the World Series last year, to see how they are. And then, of course, the champion, to see how the Royals do after success that they haven't had ever really, this level of success, how they can carry it over into year 2.
Well, let's move over to NASCAR now. Dale Earnhardt Jr. announcing that he will be donating his brain to concussion research, and he's not the first athlete to be doing this now. Why is it now that everybody's starting to do this?
It's a major, it's a potential game changer in in sports in general, not just football. And I'm sure that it's something near and dear to his heart after, how his father passed away in that accident that killed him. And it is just a topic that I guess his main motivation is clarity on the issue, because the more research that can be done, the more sure we can be of what's going on with head injuries and collisions, whether it be on a football field or on a racetrack. So if somebody makes this is kind of like a dying wish, and what other motive than a pure motive can you have when you're doing something like that?
Exactly, and you're doing it for the sport, and you're kind of doing it for the betterment of everyone. And from what I've read, he really started this after Kenny Stabler and some of his teammates from the Oakland Raiders said they'll donate their brains as well because of all the things that have come up over the last however many years. And we saw the passing of Kevin Turner, a former Alabama player, who for a long time fought to see if there was a correlation between ALS and the concussions that he's had and the hits that he's had. There's no doubt we've gone a long way, and there's no doubt that movies like Concussion, the one that started Will Smith, kind of brought this thing to the mainstream and kind of brought it to the forefront. And I think one of the biggest things is that you don't want to scare people away from sports. You want them to know what they're getting into. And I think even when a sport that you don't think about concussions, you don't really think about it in soccer and in cheerleading and in racing, but it happens. And even Dale Jr. had 2 not too long ago that held him out of racing. I just think, like Mickey said, clarity, going into it knowing what a concussion does what the second one does, what the protocol is if you have one,
Right.
not being scared of what is going to come out of the results, but really having a lot more information going into it. That way the youngsters right now can play the sport a lot safer, whether the sport is soccer, whether the sport is cheerleading, football, racing. I just think that it opens it up more. And when you have headliners like Dale Jr. talking about this issue the way that he has, I think it could be a domino effect to a larger, more productive conversation.
And I also too think I think it's going to be very interesting to see what comes down the pipeline technology-wise to guard against these type injuries and to help lower the risk of suffering these types of life-changing injuries with your head and your brain. And as innovative as we are, and as many good companies that are out there, and there's already been a lot of work already done in the safety area with all sports, I think we're going to see some things come down the pipe that's going to, to me, I think that's the only thing that's going to save football.
Exactly.
Is there's got to be, they can do rule changes, which they've done, but short of putting a flag on everybody's hip and taking the physical part out of the game, you need more safety in the equipment, and it's going to be real interesting to see what comes there.
It will be. And let's move over to basketball now. Jared Haas, who's been the head coach over at UAB, has left to Stanford. What kind of job is this for him?
Well, he's stepping into the big time. UAB was a very good basketball program, and as we all know, probably the best in the state of Alabama.
Yeah.
And he's done a great job there, and it will be a big change of scenery, obviously, a change of culture. So I think it's a great move for him.
Yeah, and you could tell by the way that he left UAB, there was not a lot of hard feelings, but I think he kind of took UAB as almost as far as it'll go as with the conference that they're in and the kind of basketball that they play. But they won a conference championship regular season. They won a conference championship in the tournament. They won an NCAA tournament game. He won 80 games when he was there. I think that he did basically all he could in 4 years, and he has a really, really good bloodline, so to speak, a coaching bloodline. He coached with Roy Williams, coached with those North Carolina teams for a very long time. He goes out to the Pac-12, which is a very weak conference overall, and he's got a chance to do something special over there. And so I think that it's a good move for him. And we'll see now where UAB goes from here on out, because this move also in a domino effect affects JSU, because these are two programs that play Division I basketball in a good basketball conference, and they both can get the same-ish guy.
Well, that'll be very interesting to see. Staying with basketball, the UConn women, we've seen them all season long dominating. What does this do for basketball?
Well, I know we were talking during the break about this, and there's really not much you can do. You don't want to penalize somebody for being successful, but the gap between them and everybody else is widened. That's what everybody's starting to pay attention to. Kind of like we talked about NASCAR a minute ago, kind of like the Jimmy Johnson thing a few years ago, when so many people were tuning out the sport and didn't really like him because he wasn't very charismatic. And people were like, somebody needs to do something about Jimmy Johnson. Well, that's what we're hearing now about Connecticut.
Yeah, and they've won 70-something games in a row, and they won their Sweet 16 game by close to 60 points. I think some of the people who are turned off by this whole situation are really turned more off by the fact that they go into the game and there's no competition. And they're favored to win by 20, and they win by 54. And I think that if we had a Tennessee with Pat Summitt and a Shamika Holskar or a Brittany Griner at Baylor, who made things interesting at where they can still have a dominant effect, but they have legitimate competition. I think that's where the rubber meets the road. I know Gina Auriemma, the UConn women's coach, had a lot to say about people who are saying that this is bad for college sports. He pointed to UCLA. He's pointed to Tiger Woods. Nobody was complaining when they were dominating. I just think that they're in a different category than those guys and those teams were. I just think that somebody at some point will have to beat them in order for women's basketball to become interesting again. But like Mickey said, you can't punish dominance, and salute to them. They're going to probably make some history and win a fourth straight national championship.
Well, they'll be playing for their national championship next Tuesday following the men. That'll do it for this week's edition of The Locker Room. There's some times, if you want to watch the show again, there's some times on Thursday and Friday you can do so, and of course on TV24.tv under the On Demand section. And as always, follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us on The Locker Room this week. We will be back next week.